Okay, welcome. Jason Murphy, Rebel Dharma, Wednesday night. Those of you in the room, those of you on the Zoom, glad you're here. Anyone new that wishes to introduce themselves, either on Zoom or in the room? Okay. Well, welcome back. Glad you're all in attendance. I've been thinking a bit about this month, and I've been talking for a while, I've been kind of moving through the Buddha story, and it didn't even really dawn on me until I guess a couple days ago. But May is like kind of a holy time in the Buddha's in Buddhism. It's known as Vesak. And this month, I think it was the beginning. I mean, it was definitely the beginning of this month that I started just kind of began to talk about the Buddha and the Buddha story, and kind of breaking it down and going through utilizing the kind of trajectory of the hero's journey. And then it kind of dawned on me, oh, it's Vesak, and it's Ben Vesak. And Vesak is kind of this it's also known as kind of Buddha Day. And it's like the celebration of the Buddha's birth. So it's kind of like his birthday, his enlightenment day, and his death day supposedly all happened in May, on a full moon in May. At least that's, it's kind of like the way that Christmas gets moved to, it seems like that's just the day that they meaning the kind of Buddhists of the world, decided to just pick a day. Okay, full moon in May, we're going to celebrate the life of the Buddha. So I found it interesting that, I guess, kind of intuitively, I've just been talking about the Buddha's life for several weeks now. And I appreciate that for myself. And I thought I would talk a little bit about Vesak. And really, I guess what I'll probably do is, just continue along this trajectory where I'm talking about kind of, the Buddha's awakening, and then what happened after his awakening, as we've kind of moved into. And I might read a few. There's some kind of comments from the author of this book that I've been reading, called The Buddha and His Teachings. It's from a Sri Lankan monk, and it's the author's name is Narada, and it's from the Buddhist. Actually, this was printed in the Buddhist Missionary Society of Malaysia, actually. So, yet I got it at a Sri Lankan monastery that I went to not that long ago. But I think there's some interesting points to it. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit. But yeah, I think we'll just start with some meditation. So we'll find a posture that's workable, that's sustainable. Everyone that's here has done some amount of meditation. And so finding a posture, workable, sustainable, sitting in a chair, on a cushion. It's helpful to just allow the eyes to close and to bring in some intention. Some intention for your sit this evening. I'm actually going to chant a traditional kind of Pali chant as a paying homage to the Buddha as a beginning. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And that is paying homage to the Buddha, the awakened one, the enlightened one. So opening to the comings and goings of sound. Finding some connection to the breath and body. As we settle in, is recognizing whatever that intention is for your sit this evening. Breathing in. Know that you're breathing in. Breathing out. Know that you're breathing out. The invitation is to aim the attention towards this experience, this present time experience. Could be the breath, connection to the breath. Could be the comings and goings of sound or the sensations of the body. Really, or resting in the awareness of all three. Sometimes that can be challenging to start there. But find your own way. Aim, connect, and sustain. Of course, the mind will wander off. It's not a problem. It's just what minds do. Think, plan, remember. Whenever we recognize that the attention has wandered off, with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, just aim the attention back. Connect to the experience, present time, breath, body, sound, and sustain that connection for as long as possible with a sense of curiosity, openness. again and again. Recognizing if the attention wanders off, with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back. Each breath, each moment, relax, observe, allow. Relaxing into each new breath, observing what arises in the heart and the mind, and allowing whatever arises to stay for a time and pass away, as all things do. Relax, observe, allow. relax, observe, allow each moment. in these last few moments of this formal meditation, the invitation is to, kind of give some attention to what's the quality of the mind. If perhaps there's been a tight focus, maybe soften, expand the awareness. And if perhaps the mind has been flighty or busy or restless, the invitation would be to kind of tighten the awareness or the concentration to a smaller point, tip of the nose or rise and fall of the belly. So either tightening the awareness or loosening the awareness depending on conditions, state of mind. Don't think too hard on it. Just make a decision what feels right for you. Moving your body in way you feel like you need to or want to. Oh, no, I think I'm just going to jump right in. I'll open up for more questions towards the end of the talk. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been kind of moving through the trajectory of the hero's journey, utilizing the Buddhist story, archetypal story found within Jungian psychology. This arch or this arc says that there's a calling. Siddhartha Gautama had a calling, and then some departure into homelessness or the holy life, renunciation, some struggle, quite a bit of struggle, an awakening, and then a return. And so I feel like, I just want to talk a little bit about the rebellious kind of nature of the Buddha and then give a couple teachings. So, I feel like the Buddha rebelled against his own mind. He rebelled against his own conditioning, as we are asked to do. His thoughts, his body, his perception. He even sat in rebellion against the attack of Mara, also known as the hindrances. His kind of defiant nature and power to kind of question authority was a quality that I believe led to his departure into homelessness to begin with. This kind of questioning, like basically in having everything that he wanted and all of his needs met, why was he still dissatisfied? Why was there still a level of dissatisfaction? As we've pointed to, or as I've pointed to, I believe from a Buddhist kind of psychological perspective, the Buddha had an attachment trauma at birth. His birth mother died just a few days after he was born, and he was raised by his aunt and his father. And I would assume a lot of servants and wet nurses and nannies and whatnot. So I feel like this, this kind of started a level of kind of questioning that was central in the Buddha to be Siddhartha, seeking some kind of understanding of suffering and the freedom from suffering, and this dissatisfaction with the way things are. And, he spoke out against the other teachings of the time, religious rituals, which were hierarchical, patriarchal, classist. He really rebelled against the status quo, the norm of the time. The Buddha, after his enlightenment, he offered this teaching to everyone without exception, and all were welcome. He taught about the acts of generosity and loving kindness as an antidote to greed and to hatred. He taught that the practice of this present time awareness will deliver one out of delusion and into the light of the dharmas. So all were welcome. Women, the poor, beggars, the mentally ill, wealthy, gay, kids, prostitutes, all were welcome. No one was excluded from the ability to awaken or to listen to the Dharma or hear the teachings. All one needed, this is one of the things that he talks about throughout many of his teachings, all one needed was the desire to wake up and to practice what he taught. It's really all he asked. Do you have the willingness to do what's hard, to go against the stream, against the status quo, against the kind of delusion that the dead, what are called the dead ends, the craving for existence, this kind of being somebody, or the craving for non-existence, being nobody or feeling nothing. Out of these two extremes is what he discovered, the middle path. And that in order to really step onto the middle path takes quite a few things. So I even believe that there's this very poignant teaching called the Kalama Sutta. And the Kalama Sutta is basically, there were a group of people known as the Kalamas that lived along the Ganges. And this is a very well-known teaching, particularly here in the West. And the Kalama people, they were kind of I know they were like on the trade route. And so there were always gurus and teachers and enlightened beings kind of showing up in their town and saying, like, do this practice. Kind of like I would kind of think of them as like in the 1800s, like there was like snake oil salesmen that were like travel through town and sell their wares, but they were selling enlightenment, selling, their teaching. And there would be a yoga master one week, and then a concentration master another week, and then a kind of a Hindu sage the following week. And so the Kalama people were a little bit jaded, right? Every week they were hearing a new teaching, and they were given a new, like, this is the way. And so the Buddha and a couple of his after his awakening, and he was traveling and teaching, and he was outside of the town, the village that the Kalama people resided in, and he wasn't like proselytizing anything, but he was there, and some of the townsfolk kind of heard that he was offering teachings, and him and his monks were sitting in meditation. And so some of the townsfolk came to teaching, and offered some dana, offered some meals, some food, which was customary at the time and is still customary today. As a kind of, there's an exchange that happens between monastics and lay people, or teachers and lay people, and that exchange is the teachings and the practice for some kind of sustainability. So like when I lived in Thailand, and when I trained and was ordained in Thailand, we would go out every morning, and we would go on what's called bindabat, which is basically walking barefoot through the village with a bowl, kind of humbly, not even asking or requesting. It was just this opportunity for the villagers to be generous. And some of them, very, poor kind of subsistence farmers that would, only have like a little handful of sticky rice to spare, but each villager giving a little bit would feed the monastery. And then people who had more would give more. We'd get food deliveries sometimes, would be out, walking barefoot at dawn, and then come back, and then there's this huge meal because some, bigwig in Bangkok or whatever kind of, bought the monastery, sponsored the meal for the day. So that was always nice. But it was always this kind of exchange, and this was true in the time of the Buddha. So the Kalama people basically kind of were questioning the Buddha. They were like, okay, so you're saying that, there's these Four Noble Truths, and you're saying that there's this middle path, and that the key to enlightenment is to find this middle path known as sati, or mindfulness, and ethics and concentration. But last week someone else was saying that doing this particular yoga would get you enlightened. So how is what you're saying different, and why should we believe you? And the Buddha, basically, I'm going to kind of paraphrase, but basically, in short, he said, don't believe something just because you heard it before, or it's an old tradition, or it's written in religious or other books, or superficially it seems true, or logically or philosophically it seems true. Don't believe something just because teachers or elders say it's true, even famous ones, well-known ones. The Buddha told the Kalama people, only believe something that you yourself have experienced the happiness of a practice and leads to relief of suffering in your own life and in the life of others. Trust your own experience and find freedom through clear seeing of the Dharma, the truth, right, in nature, through your own direct experience. And this is one of my kind of favorite moments that I've heard repeated over and over. The Buddha even really said, don't believe anything I say. you know, even if I tell you something that doesn't fit for you, you know, see for yourself. Adipasiko is the Pali translation of this moment where he is basically saying, this is the practice. This is what I have found. This is what worked for me. I believe it will work for you, but don't have blind faith about it. Have verifiable faith. And how do you have verifiable faith? Well, through practice, through effort, through conviction for yourself. And this is very kind of encouraging words for the column of people. Obviously, they felt relieved. They're not being sold a bill of goods, but that the Buddha was basically like, you know, see for yourself. If you don't think that what I'm saying fits for you, then discard it. And, you know, I think others in my generation try to convey that as well. So one of these aspects of Vesak, of this kind of understanding of the celebration, the recognition of this 2,500-year-old teaching, is to look at what are called the three gems, right? Which have evolved into a way of, this is what quote unquote makes you Buddhist, right? The understanding, or this is what makes something is considered Buddhism. Something is considered Buddhism if the three gems are a foundational teaching. Right? And so the three gems are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And so the chant that I gave in the beginning is actually part of a longer chant where it talks about honoring the Buddha, honoring the Dharma, and honoring the Sangha. And so I'll talk a little bit about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha from this perspective, kind of, I mean, I think I even said last week, for say 200 years after the Buddha died, during the Buddha's life, and for about 200 years after the Buddha died, there were no images of the Buddha. There were no statues. That came all much later, and even in the time of the Buddha, that people would want to exonerate him and bow, and there was a respectful way of doing that is found within the teachings of bowing and sitting to one side or giving an offering. That is what was common amongst holy men. So, people who were revered, like say like the Dalai Lama or something, there might be like some instinctual nature to bow to someone like the Dalai Lama, or I don't know, some emperor or something, I don't know. So that was commonplace. But the Buddha, during his life, really downplayed his own importance in some level, and really was kind of like people would want to bow to him and revere him. And he was, very like, I'm a simple monk, I'm a teacher. This is what I teach. If you want to revere something, revere the Dharma or revere the Sangha, right? So the Dharma, the teachings, and so I'll go a little bit. But then later on, and I'll explain a little bit more about why it is that we do bring in the Buddha as a part of the triple gem. So this is also what's called taking refuge. So taking refuge in the Buddha is not taking refuge in him as a person, right? But more taking refuge in the fact of his awakening. Placing trust in the belief that he did awaken to the truth of suffering and the end of suffering, and that he did so by developing qualities that we can develop. And this is basically what that Adipasiko and the Kalama Sutta is kind of pointing to, of like trust in your own ability to awaken, and utilizing the symbol of the Buddha as a symbol of our own ability to awaken. So then there's the Dharma, right? So the Dharma on an external level refers to the path or practice that the Buddha taught to his followers. And this in turn is divided into kind of three levels. So there's kind of three levels of understanding about the Dharma. And there's, different translations of Dharma based on the religious kind of, orientation. But from the Buddhist perspective, we're talking about the words of his teachings. So the written down, translated, repeated words of his teachings, but like what's in this book and what's in what's called the suttas or the Pali Canon, right? Then there's the act of putting those teachings into practice. So the Dharma is the practice of applying the teaching. So earlier when I was saying, awakening to the dharmas is a way of talking about this group of teachings and practice. It's not just the philosophical kind of top-down understanding of things, but actually a developmental unfolding of our own wisdom, which is basically what's meant by the Dharma. Right? And then third, that the attainment of awakening as a result of that practice. So the awakening to the Dharma or the truth in nature, which, from this Buddhist perspective is basically saying like, it's already here and we just need to get out of our own way, that really the awakening is to be discovered or uncovered, that it's already, almost every teacher I've ever respected has given some version of this. It's not out there, it's in here. And it's about, blooming that, which like a few weeks ago, I was talking about the lotus blossom, and right after the Buddha's awakening, he's sitting next to a lotus pond and he sees these different lotus blossoms popping up from the muck, from the mud, right? There's a famous Thich Nhat Hanh poem that says no mud, no lotus. So, the effort that it takes for the lotus to grow and, reach above the water and bloom is basically the Buddha talking about that we all have this seed of Dharma and that whether we cultivate it or not is up to us. So this is the Dharma. So, learning about the teachings, using them to develop the qualities that the Buddha himself used to obtain awakening. And then realizing that the same release from danger that he found is the quality of what's called nibbana, that we all can touch within. This is a way of talking about the Dharma. So Sangha loosely means community, but there's different ways of talking about Sangha. So the word Sangha on an external level has two senses, like the conventional Sangha and the ideal Sangha. And it's in its ideal sense, the Sangha consists of all people, lay or ordained, who have practiced the Dharma to the point of gaining at least a glimpse of freedom from suffering. So this is this kind of larger, like all Buddhists, all people who meditate, all people who are interested in these teachings and have been. The conventional Sangha has helped to keep the teachings alive for more than 2,500 years. So this, kind of honoring the fact that this tradition has been passed down from teacher to student for thousands of years, right? And that without them, we may never have known what the Buddha taught. The Dharma may have died out long ago. So, however, not all, and this is something that I think we can all relate to, not all members of the conventional Sangha are reliable models of behavior. Not everyone acts in a pure-hearted way that is, not enlightened, and so we have to think about that. Mhm. So, we're looking for guidance in the conduct of our lives. We must look to the living and the recorded examples kind of provided by the ideal Sangha. The ideal Sangha meaning like what's in the suttas, what's in the teachings. And like even as like I'm talking to you about my translation, my understanding of this practice, and it's encouraged for anyone that's been practicing for some time to read the suttas, to pick up a book that is the some form of translation of the original teachings of the Buddha. One of my kind of favorite, I feel like, is really usable for us, for lay people, non-monastics, is called In the Buddha's Words by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's an anthology of all of the kind of essential teachings for lay people, and it's put into one book. It's a pretty big book. It's about the size of a Bible, but it's user friendly. It's not super repetitive. A lot of the way that the original teachings are taught is came from the chanting. So the chanting was about memorization, and so memorization was about repeating, and so everything was repeated. And so when you read the literal translations that have been passed down from generation to generation and retranslated and translated from Pali to English or Pali to Chinese or Pali to Sanskrit or Tibetan, they're altered slightly, but they're very repetitive to read. So they're very labor intensive. So anyway, so we look for guidance in the conduct of our lives through the teachings and through this kind of larger idea of community. Now that's one aspect. The other aspect is that Sangha is about like practicing with other people, that we don't just do this alone. And this is where Against the Stream comes into play. This is where I think my group, what I really appreciate, what I try to do is build a sense of community where people can come and practice together and have thoughtful discussions about the Dharma or about the teachings, and and connect in that way. Yeah. So the awakening, part of this understanding of the ideal Sangha, and this is, talking about the Buddha, but it's also talking about, stories like the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, and, these other teachers, these other enlightened beings that came after the Buddha, all the way up till, whoever the most recent, like I'm using the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh, who's no longer with us, or Ajahn Chah, or Ajahn Sumedho, or, these kind of representations of the ideal Sangha. So one of the things that I feel like that they hold, or one of the examples, is that the awakening is available to all and not just to the Buddha. And that how awakening kind of expresses itself in real life, that's what this group is about. And, how does this awakening, how does the Dharma, even though it's 2,568 years old, how does it translate to today? How can we apply it? And I think this is where this kind of larger understanding of Sangha comes from. Right? So the Theravadan tradition believes that all have the ability to awaken, but one must practice, right? Practice is the key. And on an internal level, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are the skillful qualities that we develop in our own minds, in kind of imitation of our external models. So we start externally through reading, through teachers, and then we're bringing that internal, right? So one of the ways I like to think about this is that there's imitation, or imitating what we see. We're, sitting how, and this happens a lot with teachers where people will start to talk like their teachers, or they'll start to dress like their teachers. And I've always been a little, I mean, it happens here too, but not necessarily my group, but at the center. And that's part of the process, right, of emulating what you see as a guide or a teacher or sangha or community that you relate to. And then at some point, there's a phase of regurgitation, right? Where it's like, okay, first I'm imitating, and then I'm regurgitating the different teachings or what I'm hearing. And, this happens in all different kinds of communities, right? It happens a lot in AA. If you ever been to AA, there's a lot of imitation in the beginning of like, how do I fit in here? How do I get along? And then regurgitation. And then the final phase is integration. So how do we then take this teaching, take this practice once we've, moved through the phase of imitation and regurgitation into integration? And this is what I think's been talked about here, So the Buddha was a person, right? The person of wisdom, purity, and compassion. When we develop so that's an external guide. And when we develop wisdom, purity, and compassion in our own minds, then they form our refuge on an internal level. That the Buddha tasted awakening by developing conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. These are also known as the 5 powers. And by our working, when we develop these same qualities to the point of attaining some type of awakening, that awakening is our ultimate refuge. So when we begin to kind of really integrate this into our lives, then it becomes that which is reliable. At least that's been my experience. When nothing else, my experience was that the Dharma, when the Sangha failed, and when the teacher failed, and even when the doubt of my own ability to become fully awakened, I had a strong conviction that I could become enlightened in this life for many years. And then there was a time where I was like, okay, maybe not. Like, I'm just a little too fucking deluded, but the conviction that even I guess the conviction for me was seeing that there are others in the Sangha who had reduced suffering in their own life, and that I had, looking back, reduced through this practice suffering in my own life, my ways of reacting versus responding. I began to kind of have a shift, a perception shift, through doing some longer practices, or being in Asia for a time, and different, just different, staying with it, So this is the point where the kind of 3 aspects of the triple gem become one, right? Beyond the reach of greed, anger, and delusion, and thus kind of totally secure. So this is where we're not necessarily, I'm taking refuge in the Buddha out there, but it's the potential to awaken in here. I'm taking refuge in the Dharma, not necessarily the book of the teachings, but how am I interpreting that, understanding that, integrating that into my life? And the Sangha, meaning the community that I'm living with, that actually, that helps me, be accountable, right? It helps me be accountable. That will challenge me, It's not just like, let's just be good Buddhists, but actually, I think, one of the things that I found in Sangha is being challenging my own perception of things, challenging the places where I'm delusional. Most of us, we can't see when we're delusional. We're just delusional. We're just in delusion. And greed has a flavor of delusion, and hatred has a flavor of delusion, and ignorance has a flavor of delusion. And so when we're in a deluded state, we don't often notice that. We might notice the greed, we might notice the hatred, but we don't usually notice the delusion. And so Sangha and practice can help us to see clearly in that way. All right, so this last kind of piece, in my study of psychology, I've seen that these kind of Buddhist ideals connect to modern psychology, which says that we're all searching for connection. Most modern psychology points to we all want to be seen. We all want to be connected, right? And I was talking some time ago about the triune brain, and that we have this kind of reptilian brain that's very reactive and about safety and protection. Then we have this emotional brain that's in the limbic system that is very much about connection. And then we have a higher level of brain, the cortex, our ability to kind of think and ration, and that's almost always looking for contentment, like some level of contentment. So we can intellectualize this idea of contentment, but without feeling safe or calm in this old brain, and connected in this kind of human way, and being seen and recognized, then we're not going to necessarily get into that contented state of mind. So we have so in modern psychology, and how this is in line with Buddhism, it says that we're seeking connection on a deeper understanding of self, of who we are. We're seeking connection with others in the community, and connection with this something bigger than ourselves. And from a Buddhist perspective, bigger than ourselves means the truth in nature, the Dharma, or the law of cause and effect, right? This causality that's being pointed to. So there's more, but I think I'll pause there, and before I move into the precepts, which maybe we can cover on another day. But I just wanted to, say that much around Vesak and this kind of the rebellious nature of the Buddha, and my kind of perception. I love the Kalama Sutta and this see for yourself adipasiko is really what helped me have more conviction, more confidence in this practice, because I had teachers that were saying, don't believe anything that I say, and I try to say that as often as possible. But just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it's not true, right? Because our wisdom and our perception our wisdom can deepen, and our perception can shift, right? So but find out for yourself, which I've always appreciated. So I'll open up for thoughts, questions, comments at this point, and then we'll see what happens. If there's more to say.
Did the Buddha acknowledge that he was a rebel? Was that part of the discussion around him at the time?
I don't think so. I don't think he had that level of ego, to be honest. I feel like he just
like he's revolutionary. You know what I mean?
Yeah, my sense is that people didn't like the Buddha, but he had such strong conviction in, like, this is just the way things are. You can believe it or not believe it. There's this one story. It's called the story of the mustard seed, and the Buddha is outside a village, as is in every story. He's outside the village, and people come to him, and they're getting teachings. And this woman who has a baby, like a couple-year-old baby, or actually not even that old, but like an infant, brings his infant, her infant. She's despondent, she's distraught. Her infant has died, not breathing, is blue, and hears that the sage Gautama is off in the, over outside the village, and surely he has magical powers and will be able to save this, my child. So it struck him with grief, and goes and says, Gautama, Buddha, please, use your powers and bring my child back to life. And the Buddha was like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Like, I don't have that power. And then no, you must have this power. You must be able to do this, just any last hope. And then the Buddha, kind of seeing the delusion in this woman's mind, says, okay, set your baby down here and go to the village and go to every house, and any house that there is that there has not been death, that death has not visited, bring me a mustard seed. And the woman, the mother, was like, okay, I'll do that. And then rushes off and is knocking on the door and goes to the first house. And no, I'm sorry, my husband died a few years ago, and goes to the next house. And my child died, and goes to the next house. Our grandparents died. So slowly the woman comes to some understanding, some recognition of the sadness, the grief, the loss. That loss is inescapable. And comes back to the Buddha and says, I see now, I understand, and please, will you help me bury my child? Which, of course, then they did a funeral rites and buried the child, and helped her with her grief. And so was that revolutionary? Was that, I think that it was just the wise thing to do. And it feels to me, in all of the teachings that I have understood and read and practiced, that the Buddha was not trying to, he was trying to make a change, but out of just for the sake of goodness, in the world, for the sake of the giving the ability to cleanse one's karma, and that was all. So I don't think that he was, don't you see how rebellious I am? This is actually, I've read some things about, there's a whole group of teachings that, came later. They're commentaries of, British professors and whatnot that talk about the rebel saint, right? And there's been some groups that have started, and I this is why I call my group the Rebel Dharma, because I believe that in my translation, my understanding, my perception of the teachings is that they're absolutely rebellious, and that there's an internal rebellion needed to have that calling and to depart from our kind of sleepwalking way of being, right? Or anesthetized way of being. And that, this room and other rooms like it isn't full because of, what Noah called the center. It goes against the stream. It's not fucking easy, And so going on something like a silent meditation retreat, I still talk to people. It's been decades I've been doing this meditation stuff, and people are like, God, I just couldn't imagine going on a silent meditation retreat. Like, what do you do? And, and I say, you have to see for yourself, really. But what happens in my experience is that you get quiet. That's what happens. You actually get quiet. But first you realize that you're totally insane and you're just distracting yourself by trying to talk to everyone all day. That's part of the process. Yeah, I got a hand. A couple hands. Casey, let's go with Casey and then Mike.
So you said something a couple weeks ago that really stuck with me in kind of a weird way. You were talking about, and forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing this comment, but you were talking about enlightenment, and you were sort of listing off all the people in the world who you think are likely to achieve enlightenment that exists like on Earth today. And you said there were maybe 2 or 3 of them, maybe. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me that there are hundreds of millions of Buddhists in the world.
Mhm.
and only 2 or 3 of them currently in existence even have a chance of getting to the place that hundreds of millions of people are working towards.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm just that like that
Add
was
on.
yeah, that was like a very sobering sort of thing to hear. I'm relatively new to this. And I guess my question for you, and I would, you know, extend it to other members of the Sangha as well, if they have their own perspectives about it, is just like, how do you process that? How do you interpret that? You said today that you thought that you could achieve Nibbana this in this lifetime when you were younger, and then at a certain point you sort of abandoned that notion, or you were able to reconcile the fact that you wouldn't be able to. So do you plan to in another life, or like, what are we doing here, you know?
Yeah, no,
Easy questions.
no, thanks. Yeah, no, great. I'm glad you brought it up. I don't, I mean, I vaguely remember that conversation, but yeah, I think if I search in my mind, like, but first of all, we have to get clear about what does it mean to be awake? You know, so there is what's called arahantship. So in the chant that I said earlier, I said, Namo tassa bhagavato arahato dhamma no sama sambuddhasa. Arahanto means through the teachings of the Buddha, becoming, like, removing greed, hatred, and delusion completely, right? So in essence, so I don't know many people who have removed greed, hatred, and delusion completely from their heart mind. I believe Thich Nhat Hanh was probably fucking awake. He was probably pretty enlightened. The Dalai Lama, you know, I don't know. I would say probably. A couple Western teachers. There's definitely some, you know, Ajahn Sumedho, pretty clear, but I don't think completely free. I don't think an arahant. And there's been some other Western teachers that I have come across who I feel like are pretty close, like are pretty free in their life, you know. But you also, and this is part of the ideal Sangha versus the, you know, the relative Sangha, right? Or the conventional Sangha. Because you really got to watch someone, not just from the podium, you know, but who, like, what are, like, are they really free, or are they good at, you know, like Eckhart. I think we were talking during that time, I think I was talking about Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle is someone who has claimed to be an arahant, to be fully awakened. I don't know if that's true. I've never seen him not in front of a group of fucking meditators, you know. I remember this teacher, and these are all, you know, other traditions, but this teacher named Adyashanti, who is very much like, he was like a Zen guy, and then he became like a non-dualist Zen guy and got super just like popular, and he had that kind of guru mentality. And you know, I met him at a meditation, like a Buddhist teacher's meditation retreat, actually. And, you know, got to meet him as a person. And I was not convinced, you know, that he was a fucking awakened being, you know. And there's been several of those. So it just kind of, yeah, like, what are we doing here? I think, for me, like, I think I had this idealistic, like, view of I'm going to become awakened in this life. I also thought I could levitate. I was going to learn to levitate. I was going to learn to be fucking free from suffering. I was going to learn to read minds. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I believed it. And then after a while of like uncovering, it was like, okay, well, maybe not this life, but maybe next life. Yeah, maybe next life. maybe the goal here is to cleanse as much karma as I possibly can, to live as pure-hearted as possible in this life. And that's good enough, you know? So I kind of just rested at that, and that's good enough. I don't necessarily need superpowers. Yeah. So that's kind of my thought, you know, around arahantship. And, you know, the other kind of trick here is that in the Theravadan tradition anyway, if you become an enlightened being, you're not allowed to tell anyone. Like, that's the thing. You got to, like, so anyone who's kind of like saying like, I'm awakened, I'm enlightened, that's part of the deal. It's like, wait, I mean, are you supposed to be telling people that? The Buddha didn't call himself the Buddha. He called himself the one who is awake, you know, the Tagataka. I can't remember exactly the translation of the word Tagataka, but basically it's kind of like is talking about himself as the one who has gone forth or something like that. Anyway, I don't know if that was helpful at all, but that's my kind of thought about it, Casey.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, yeah, why the fuck are we doing this? Well, because my life has gotten tremendously better. It just has. I feel like, you know, I was just, I don't know, like a rooting kind of grunt human before, you know, what the Buddha calls the unenlightened worldling, you know, and that stepping on the path, it's kind of cleared my mind in so many ways, that I don't know that I'll reach full enlightenment, mainly because I'm not a monk, mainly because I haven't. This is really where it happened, is that I had to decide whether I wanted to be, like, when I ordained twice. I had to decide the first time. I had to decide whether this is something I wanted to I wanted to commit my life to. Yeah, completely. And I was like, you know, robes are uncomfortable. You're hanging out. It's just, no, that wasn't the only thing. But that there was I felt like there was other ways that I wanted to use my life force energy. And, you know, so that was a kind of realization of like, okay, well, giving up the, you know, the can one become fully awake while living in, can one become fully awake while living in the world in this way as a householder? Most teachings would say no. Most monks would absolutely say no. Most high teachers would say no. But we can live as closely to that as possible, and we can relieve as much suffering as possible in this life. And what else is there to do? You know? So that's my thought about it. Mikey.
Thanks, Jason. Grateful for the reflections, and the part that really resonated the most with me is like when you talked about questioning teachers, or the fact that, you know, your take on it is it's not like dogmatic. Like Buddhism isn't dogmatic, you know, like it's not believe or else, like fire and brimstone Catholicism. And it's something that came to me like while you were reflecting on it, was that everything's changing. Like, you know, like I think with me, like I guess one of my default mechanisms is a striver, you know, like to strive to try to achieve. And then I can remember a time when you skillfully, in a kind way, kind of like told me to like look at that and contemplate that. And I like I had receptivity around that, and I softened around that, and it's been very, very helpful in practice. And with everything always changing, and nothing to get, and nothing static or linear, and everything like inherently unsatisfactory, I really feel like there's plenty of times in practice I've been delusional, and I think one of the things that resonated the most was just questioning things and questioning each other in Sangha in a skillful kind of way, and having bandwidth and space around that, and loving kindness, but going into those areas, like shouldering into those areas. And I really like how you unpack that. And I really feel like, for me, like, the beliefs can't be static if everything's changing. Like, one day I could feel a certain way, one day I could feel another way, one day I could see it one way, one day I could see it another way. So just always looking at that through those lenses, and then questioning things, and then gaining a verifiable faith over time through the teaching. So I really liked your reflections, and it kept bringing me back to impermanence and all of that. So thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, there's more. I mean, yeah, I feel like, that's another one of the reasons why, yeah, you don't have to fucking believe anything. You don't even have to believe in the Buddha to benefit from meditation, and I just love that. I just find that to be so freeing, especially in the beginning, especially when I was like deep in my kind of atheistic, like non-conformist, like, what's up with these Buddhists? Luckily I had someone like Noah who had been ahead of the game, like was in and was like, he didn't have to. I mean, he did it for a little while. He like did this weird thing where he wore white all the time, and he thought he was, gonna levitate or something. But I was, I understood that. But but when I really saw, when I really began to see change and really began to get interested, is when I saw, like, oh, you can inhabit your personality, you can inhabit who you are, and that's okay. Like, that's actually enough. And so, but can we also begin to question our faulty belief systems, our perceptions, our misguided perceptions, our reactivity, our defense mechanisms? Can we begin to kind of look at this, all these other, what we call kind of psychological aspects, and one of the ways that we can begin to do that in order for meditation to really be beneficial is to have some kind of ethical integrity. And this is where I'll go next week, in talking about the Buddha story and the Buddha Dharma. All right, so we'll talk about kind of precepts next week and whatnot. So there's a bowl here. You can also Venmo me at No BS Buddhist or Jason Murphy. There's a link in the looks like there's something else. Shannon put, there's the YouTube, so this gets posted on YouTube, so you can go to the YouTube link also. And let's just share the merit, right? So may any goodness that's come from our time together, from our practice together, may this goodness be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings, and may we all be free.